Welcome back to the Athletes Podcast. This is episode 96 featuring Dr. Joseph Krainin, the founder and CEO of Singular Sleep, who has also worked with a couple professional teams, one being the Orlando Magic, some university teams, the University of Michigan football team to be specific, and he is an expert on sleep, all things sleep, whether that's melatonin, snoring, sleep apnea. We had some fun, talked about REM sleep, how maybe alcohol, other drugs could affect that sleep, and honestly, a great conversation around how you can optimize your sleep and improve your performance as an athlete. This is an incredible episode. Number 96, we're nearing that 100 mark, featuring Dr. Joseph Krainin. Here we go. I'm super excited to have on Dr. Joseph Krainin, who is the founder and CEO of Singular Sleep, as well as a pretty knowledgeable individual around sleep and how we can optimize it to improve performance, as well as how to identify and treat sleep disorders. Dr. Krainin, I'm super excited to have this conversation, learn a bit more, hopefully educate and entertain the next generation of athletes on how to sleep better and how they are going to perform so much better after listening to this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm super curious right off the bat. Let's dive in. You've created the first ever virtual sleep center with Singular Sleep. I would love to touch on that, as well as maybe what you want to get across here in the next 45 minutes for athletes, where specifically they should be focusing their efforts on sleep and how it is going to drastically improve their performance.
Yeah. So if you're not thinking about sleep as your best recovery tool, then you're way behind the times, because most elite coaches and sports performance experts will tell you that you can do all this stuff. You can do the cold bath, you can do the warm bath, you can stretch, you can do massage, but really, bar none, the most effective recovery tool is going to be sleep. So there's a lot of different aspects of sleep that we can talk about and get into, but broadly speaking, what I'm interested in is how sleep and sleep is really not just what you do at night with your eyes closed. There's also circadian rhythms are part of what we think about as the field of sleep. And how can we optimize performance by maybe tweaking sleep and our circadian rhythms, and then how do the other big thing is, how might sleep disorders impact your recovery, and what to look at and look for to find out if you're at risk for that, and so that could be really robbing you of the recovery that you need. So I was hoping to speak to all that. And my background is in I'm a medical doctor. I'm a physician, and I specialized in neurology, which is relevant to performance in that the nervous system includes the brain, spinal cord, the peripheral nerves, and the muscle. So all that stuff is really relevant to performance. And then there's a lot of different ways to get into the field of sleep. And I came through neurology and did extra training at the University of Michigan and in sleep. And University of Michigan has been really an epicenter for neurology and sports, and that overlap. That's where a lot of the folks who have created the concussion protocols and that sort of stuff, and look at neurological issues and how they affect athletes have really come out of that ecosystem. So got a chance to get that exposure. And I think it kind of pushed me to where I went. So I had a traditional practice in Michigan, sleep practice, but got hooked up with the Michigan State football team and was
Mm-hmm.
kind of like their go-to guy for athletes who were having sleep issues. And then that led to starting a consulting uh, business where I would meet with elite athletes and work with them on optimizing their sleep and using sleep and circadian rhythms for best performance. And that eventually led to a full-time job with the Orlando Magic for a stint, which was interesting. And so after that, I decided, well, that lifestyle is pretty tough. It seemed like maybe a dream job, but there's a lot of complications that not the least of which is really sacrificing your own sleep. So obviously someone like me is like very into sleep, and the schedule for the NBA is terrible. There, we would finish a game at like 9 and then get on a plane, go to the next city. You arrive at 2:00 in the morning local time, and there was shoot around at 9 a.m. That is just like really tough, and it goes on and on and on. It feels like the season never ends. But so ended up getting back to the traditional practice of medicine, but in a non-traditional venue. So I started Singular Sleep in 2015, and we're the world's first online sleep center. So we diagnose and treat people with sleep disorders totally remotely. So the primary thing that we deal with in sleep is it's called sleep apnea, and it's an issue where you have trouble breathing while you're sleeping. And so now it used to be you had to send people in to a sleep lab to have monitoring with all sorts of crazy things.
Bunch of tests.
Yeah, lots of wires and a little infrared camera watching you, and it was pretty creepy for most people and hard to sleep. And now we can get the information we need in most cases by sending you this kind of streamlined kit that you do at home. So that's a big thing that we do. And then people send the kit back, and I read the studies and diagnose them with issues, and then I can now meet with them online and become their doctor that way by meeting with them online, and that allows me to treat and manage the issue. And the Singular Sleep dispenses and manages the common treatment modalities for sleep apnea like CPAP and et cetera. So that's kind of my day job, but I still have a strong interest in sleep and performance, and have lectured on this, and also with regard to concussion and how that affects sleep and recovery and stuff like that. That's been kind of a focus on mine, and I've gotten kind of away from that academic and education stuff as I've been engrossed in starting and growing this business. But look forward to sharing some knowledge and dropping some science on your audience.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting parts, you brought it out there when you had your stint with the Orlando Magic and the crazy schedules that athletes have to abide by, essentially based on the workload that they're presented with. Why is it that when we know so much about sleep and how important and integral it is for performance, that we have these associations making ridiculous schedules for these athletes to try and perform on, when they're expecting these athletes to perform at the best of the best, when in reality they're getting probably half the sleep that they actually require? Can you maybe elaborate on what your experience was like there, what you saw in the National Basketball Association specifically, and how you were able to help the Orlando Magic see some success? And was that something that translated?
Yeah, that's a wonderful topic. And the answer, really, to be blunt with you, is a lot of the structure around sports these days is purely cultural and historical, and not aligned with science. So actually one of the biggest things that I thought I accomplished with the magic, with the help of a performance psychologist with the team, was we convinced the organization to stop the shoot around. I don't know if you're familiar with shoot around, but it's this concept that you get up early, like on game day, and you go and you do this kind of like zombie like kind of walk through, like very brief practice, get some shots up, go through some sets and plays and stuff like that, and then kind of break for the day. But it often leads to sleep deprivation. And then people take these long naps in the afternoon, and it's really kind of out of sync with best practices, right? And so what happened, we were like, okay, we got rid of that silly thing. And then what happened was we went on a big time losing streak, and the coach just said, okay, that's enough of that. I'm going back to what I know from when I played in the NBA, and we're going to do shoot around again. And so, there it went. So, a lot of this stuff is not best practices, no basis in sports. And, some of it is really for the fan, so like,
it's entertainment.
Games are, and stuff like that. It makes it harder for the athletes. And oftentimes, you may get less out of the athletes because of the schedule, like with travel and crossing multiple time zones and stuff like that. It can really throw athletes off. So the classic example of that is looking at, there was a study done about Monday Night Football, and looking at East Coast teams going to the West Coast versus West Coast teams going to the East Coast. Well, we know from sleep research that it's easier to phase delay than to phase advance. Phase delay means stay up later than you normally would and sleep in later. It's harder to go to bed earlier.
I would agree with
that. Makes sense. So going from the East Coast to the West Coast is generally going to be easier to adapt to, because you're staying up later on your biological time, if you will. And it's easier to adapt. So the research was, okay, so if we know that, then we might predict that people teams traveling to the West Coast would probably do, if we think this impacts performance, relatively well compared to teams going from the West Coast to play on the East Coast. And that's exactly what they found. They found that the records of those matchups tended to favor the better outcomes for the team going from the East Coast to the West Coast and vice versa. So, but there's a Monday Night Football big audience, and we want to see these teams. And if it's a great matchup, no one's really thinking about their circadian rhythms of the athletes, right? So, and we just came out of the Olympics, and it begs a lot of questions about, how do you train? When do you go over there? How to adjust? How to adapt to the different time zones? So for like American or Canadian athletes, that's a huge jump to go over there, right? And it turns out there are things you can do to help habituate. So really, it has a lot to do with your temperature nadir, so the lowest point of your body temperature during the day, and then when you can identify that, and it's rule of thumb is that's usually going to be like about 2 hours before your habitual wake time. So if you can use bright light and melatonin to facilitate the adaptation to the new time zone and lock in more quickly. But if you get bright light or take melatonin at the wrong time, it can make things way worse. So
Right.
that's something, there is an app, I believe, out there now that one of the sleep researchers put together about this, but really something you kind of need to sit down and plot out with someone who's knowledgeable about sleep and circadian rhythms and kind of figure out, well, okay, what's my current sleep schedule? Where am I going? And then you can try to,
Adjust
figure out
accordingly.
when to put a schedule together. But generally, like if you're going to Europe or beyond from the US or Canada, North America, that's going to be tough for you because that's phase advanced. You're trying to go to bed earlier according to your biological clock. So if you actually, before you're going to go, if you actually start to try to go to bed earlier than you normally would and use melatonin and bright light in certain ways, you can kind of help yourself out with that adaptation. So what you might do is if you're going to go and you have an event in London, say, you might a week or so prior to going, you might get up a little bit earlier than usual and get a big pulse of bright light for like 20 to 30
Sunlight.
minutes, and
Yeah.
sunlight, or depending on where you are, it might still be dark in
Right.
Michigan or
Red
something like
light.
that. So getting a what we call a bright light, it's something that's going to put out at least 10,000 lux, which is a
Okay.
measure of light, and sit in front of that, and that will give you that same thing, and that will help you start shifting forward your circadian rhythm, so you can be more in alignment with local time when you get there.
Right. Yeah, one of the things I know from experience that what you're supposed to kind of when you're initially setting your circadian rhythm is that initially in the morning, even before caffeine, whatever you do, you want to expose yourself to that sunlight, get 10, 15 minutes, make sure that it, resets the body, make sure the body knows that you're awake. And
Yep.
then that's sort of the beginning. And it actually helps for the end of the day make you ready to go to sleep at an earlier or at the proper stage. I believe that was the right way to describe
Yeah.
that. Can you maybe go in like what would be an ideal time to and should people be taking melatonin to help with sleep? I've heard other varying reviews about, it might help initially to get you to sleep, but then they're waking up 3 to 4 hours afterwards. Like what should people be using if they are struggling to get to sleep or looking to get better sleep? What are some of those pieces of advice that you would provide to individuals who are looking to improve their sleep?
So with melatonin, so it's commonly used over the counter in the US. I'm not sure about Canada, but in
For
Europe
sure
it's
it is.
actually it's actually a prescription
Wow.
drug in Canada, believe it or not. So people have a lot of misconceptions about melatonin. What you need to know about melatonin is that it can help you fall asleep a little bit faster, but its main power is with the circadian rhythms, like helping you adjust to a new time zone,
Okay.
and helping you shift your circadian rhythms to the new local time. Um, the the benefits of melatonin. So probably for the vast majority of armchair athletes who aren't traveling across the world to various competitions,
Tokyo, for
is
instance.
going to be like our normal lifestyle has created a lot of bad habits when it comes to sleep and circadian rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
So from the sleep perspective, the worst thing that ever happened to mankind was the invention of the electric light bulb in the Industrial Revolution, because then
Yeah.
um, it you could work at any time, and it is sort of created an abrupt change with the way we've been living forever, thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
And so the light is a problem, and sometimes the shift work is a problem. So interesting factoid. So night shift work is considered a probable carcinogen by the World Health Organization. And it just kind of speaks to, this is not really what we were designed to do, to be up all night. We're kind of programmed to be sleeping at night. And, a lot of times we can't do what our bodies were natively programmed to do because of work, whatnot, and also training after work and stuff like that. But there's an epidemic of exposure of light to light in the evening, right? So I think most folks now know about the dangers of blue light, and blue light is a frequency of white light that is particularly stimulating to the circadian system. And the blue light, there's these cells in the retina, the retinal ganglion cells, and hits these cells. They're very sensitive to it, and that feeds into the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is this. It's the master clock in the brain, deep in the brain, in the brain stem, and then that sort of directs our circadian rhythm. So blue light is very stimulating and suppresses the natural release of melatonin. So folks who are getting a lot of exposure to blue light in the evening, they tend to have trouble sleeping, particularly trouble falling asleep. So
I.e. the ones binge watching Netflix for
Netflix
hours on
and
end.
Video games,
Scrolling
like
TikTok.
just on your phone, your smartphone puts out so much blue light. It's crazy. So melatonin, I think, is commonly being used to try to help combat people's bad behaviors there. And there is a role for that. Really, I think most of us in medicine like the idea of not using medications. Even really supplements should be thought of as medications. And in the US and Canada, I guess too, melatonin is a supplement, but really it's a powerful hormone. And does it have any downsides? Not that we know of. There may be some theoretical risks, like maybe it will make you stop producing your own melatonin because your body sort of gets used to it, like with testosterone, say, another hormone. If you take testosterone as a man, your testicles will decrease in volume and you will just stop making it on your own. So could that happen with melatonin? Maybe. Is that a problem? Maybe. But I don't think there's any major long-term effects that have really been found. We think it's relatively safe. That said, there's no money really to be made with melatonin, so there's no money to do research on it, right? Because it's just ubiquitous. Like there's no patent on it, right? So it's out there, and it's not really a target for investing in and looking at what it does and doesn't do. So the most common problem with melatonin is sleepiness, right? Like if you take it at the wrong time and don't use it right, it might make you sleepy. There's also the fact that when people have looked at the composition of melatonin in melatonin supplements, that has widely varied. So you might get a supplement that says it's 3 milligrams per tab, and then it might turn out to be 1 milligram or 5, depending on, like when people do the analysis, because since it's not a drug, there's really no, it can be kind of the Wild West. What you want to look for is something like USP on there, which is a pretty good marker of quality. That's an independent lab that looks at, the composition of supplement products and test them and make sure that they're what they say they are, in terms of substance and how much. So, that I think people using melatonin now, what if you're like you work all day and you're training for a marathon, right? But that involves going and running for a couple hours at like 8 o'clock at night. and you've got to go to bed at 11 to try to get up at 7 in the morning. You're running or exercising late in the evening, it may make it very hard to fall asleep. You're really activating your um, nervous system, central nervous system, and really getting yourself like fired up, right? So ideally, the best time to exercise is in the afternoon. That's sort of where we're best programmed for. A lot of people like to do it in the morning. That's fine. That might make you pretty sleepy on later on in the day. It might get hard to get through the day. But there's a very common phenomenon where us armchair athletes are working out like in the evening, and then that may make it hard to fall asleep. And then so melatonin may have a role there to help you out. Yeah.
Yeah, this episode was super exciting for me and timely because my dad actually just got his CPAP machine yesterday and just started using it. So he had to go through that insane, I believe it was like some ridiculous like 6-month or year-long process to get all the testing that you referred to done.
It's crazy.
Go back and forth. Like you said, it was a ridiculous series of events that you need to go through to be able to get approved for, okay, you have sleep apnea, or hey, you wake up 19 times every hour. This is something that we need to address. And I've had a couple different friends, actually, funny enough, who are specifically bodybuilders who have used the CPAP machine, and have seen tremendous results. My dad said his last night's sleep was amazing as well. But how beneficial can those machines be to assisting someone in sleep? Are they something that people should be avoiding using with caution?
I love talking about this. So what folks need to know is that the key behind the recovery benefit of sleep is these natural circadian hormonal pulses and other metabolic and physiological activities that are going on. And so you look at someone while they're sleeping, you think, oh, there's nothing happening, but actually a lot of things are happening. So to speak to what you brought up about bodybuilders, so the biggest pulse, so growth hormone has a circadian rhythm to it, and we have the biggest pulse or secretion of natural growth hormone in roughly the first third of our sleep period. And most of that comes out in what's called N3 sleep. And this is like very deep sleep. If you look at the brain waves, if you looked at it out of context, you might think the person was having a seizure, because there's these giant delta waves, as we call them, and the brain is like really offline at that time. It's really hard to wake people up in N3, and if you do, they're going to be very confused. But that's where we get that growth hormone pulse, and where a lot of the catabolic activity is going to go on with the recovery. So like the building of the muscles that you've just trained and broken down, and this is where they're going to really be built up, somewhat better than they were in theory. Now, what happens if you have a sleep disorder that disrupts that process, and which ones can do that? So commonly, the most common ones we see are sleep apnea, which is, and the most common form of that is obstructive sleep apnea, where basically the breathing tube in the back of your throat is too narrow at baseline. And then during sleep, when muscle tone relaxes, your airway repetitively collapses on itself. And with obstructive sleep apnea, there's a lot of snoring typically as the airway starts to get fairly narrow. The uvula and soft palate, the uvula is that dangly piece, the back of your throat that hangs off the soft palate, start vibrating and making that snoring noise. So basically what the sleep apnea can do is really fragment your sleep, or really break it up and prevent you from getting into and staying in that really valuable N3 sleep. So there has been some good research to show that if you have that problem, that treating it can really help your training, especially so with bodybuilders. These tend to be big people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
one of the risk factors for obstructive sleep apnea is neck size. So
Yeah.
a neck size of 17 inches in men and 16 inches in women is a risk factor for obstructive sleep apnea. And we really don't think that it matters whether it's fat or muscle. So like I saw a lot of linemen with the Michigan
Okay.
State football team. These guys had a lot of muscle. They were kind of marbled, you would say. They had some fat in there too, but they were very fit. But just about everyone I saw had pretty rip-roaring sleep apnea, obstructive sleep apnea, and
Wow.
and that can be really costly in terms of setting you up for injury. You're not getting the recovery you need, and not getting the most out of your training, your catabolic needs, but also fascinating study. Just talking about I brought up football players is one of the worst things that linemen can do is go off sides, and the sleep disorders like sleep apnea can really negatively impact your attention
Yeah, your
and
cognitive
and
function just
both
goes
attention and
downhill.
reaction time. And
Yeah.
so that is some research I would love to do, looking at
Yeah.
that the linemen. And sometimes I see guys, there's like a couple guys in the NFL that always go offsides, and I'm like, I bet that guy has sleep apnea that's untreated.
You got to reach out to him, shoot him
Yeah,
an email on Instagram.
Tweet them. So, and then so the other thing that would be concerning is restless leg syndrome and its cousin called periodic limb movement disorder. So, restless leg syndrome. There's a lot of misconceptions about restless leg syndrome, RLS2. People think they know what it is, but they often don't. The way I ask about it clinically is very open-ended. Basically, it's a problem where you get a weird feeling in your legs,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got to be in the evening. And the weird feeling is described so many different ways. Some people say it's like an itching, commonly behind their knees. Some people say it's a tingling. Some people say it's a creepy, crawly feeling. And there's an urge that you're thinking about and start to move around.
Yeah.
There's an urge to move your legs, and when you move the legs, the feeling, at least very temporarily, goes away, and then it may start right back up. Sometimes actually the legs will kick on their own or twitch on their own. That is restless legs. And people sometimes say, oh yeah, I do have that, but it's not a problem for me. Well, the thing is, so that they mean that I'm not aware of it disturbing my sleep. I think I fall asleep pretty quickly. But about 80% of people with restless leg syndrome will have what are called periodic limb movements of sleep, where their legs will twitch or kick in their sleep in a very repetitive, rhythmic way. And those leg twitches often are associated with a micro brain awakening that we call a cortical arousal. And so that can interfere with your N3 as well, because that is front loaded during the night. The circadian component of RLS, PLMD is, we see that typically in the first third of the sleep period, and then it kind of goes away later in the night in the early morning hours. So that's another thing that's very common that could be interfering with your ability to get that maximal growth hormone catabolic benefit out there. And so restless legs is often secondary to something else. And overall, if you had to look at the big picture, the most common thing it's secondary to is low iron levels. Often not necessarily to the point of anemia, but just sort of like borderline low iron can cause this. So women are at risk for this because of menstruation and losing blood on a regular basis. But throw in running, like competitive running, or triathletes who have a component of running, and things go through the roof. And then guys too can also be predisposed to it, because this is really interesting. One thing that's been noted is that long distance runners actually can crush their red blood cells when they're running at the bottom of their feet and lead to basically like functional anemia, where you don't have enough iron going around, and then that can lead to this RLS PLMD type
Wow.
situation. Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure you had an interesting time going from football players at Michigan State who are, as you said, potentially marbled, and then going to the NBA with guys who are probably the exact opposite and have a very low percentage of body fat. I'm sure that was an interesting dynamic to look at. You mentioned N3 and how that sleep is vital. How does alcohol, marijuana, other drugs interact, inhibit that state? Um, I know, for instance, if I have a couple beverages in the evening, I am absolutely restless the next morning. I get zero sleep. I know for a fact that it's
Bang,
like,
you hit the nail on the head right there where you said the next morning. So here's the alcohol, the effects on sleep physiology have been very well mapped out. Marijuana, THC, not as much.
okay,
Probably we'll see more of that now that it's become more
widely
accepted in
accepted.
society and legal in many places. Um,
Hmm.
so alcohol, here's what you need to know about alcohol. Very good at putting you to sleep.
Yeah.
When we
Yes.
study people, if we hooked you up and we gave you a 6-pack of Molson or whatever, and
Hmm.
let you have at it, and then put you to bed, we would typically see that your sleep latency, which means the time it took you to fall asleep, is shorter than usual,
Hmm.
and then that in the first half of the night, you tend to have more deep sleep actually,
Mm.
more N3, but it will increase the risk of collapse of your airway. So alcohol has muscle relaxant properties.
Hmm.
And so people who snore or have sleep apnea will commonly say, oh yeah, my bed partner said it was like even worse after I had a couple drinks, right? So it can predispose you to more of that pathology and more micro fragmentation of your sleep. But
Hmm.
then the second half of the night, your brain tends to wake up very easily. The way I like to think about it, I talk to patients, it's like we commonly forget, but alcohol, of course, is a central nervous system depressant, right? So
Yep.
it's like imagine it like like whack-a-mole. It's like you've like hit all the moles down, and they're that game whack-a-mole, they're under there. But then like as you start to metabolize alcohol,
Hmm.
the moles pop up, and basically your brain is pushing back against that depressant, and it's becoming hyper aroused. And the second half of the night after acute ingestion of alcohol tends to be the what we call wake after sleep onset, or WASO, tends to
Hmm.
be very high in
Okay.
the early morning hours. And so there's a lot of fragmentation of sleep the second half of the night. And
Interesting.
that might be part of the hangover physiology right there.
Because I
So
remember hearing it's like you don't get any REM sleep when you have alcohol,
well,
and
you have
I just,
you have relative suppression of REM and an increase in non-REM, deeper stages of non-REM in the first half, and then the second half you have like a mini REM rebound. So you have a lot, all the REM that was suppressed the first half, it comes out the second half, and your brain is very active. You may have very vivid dreams, and you may like commonly people will feel like they're waking up a lot from dreams, kind of remembering that stuff, and just having a hard time sleeping into their alarm or as long as they'd like after acute alcohol
mm,
ingestion. THC, there's actually a drug in the works right now that is purported to treat sleep apnea to a certain
mm,
degree. And it looks like this is probably due to REM suppressing effects. So in REM, it's very common that people have worse obstructive sleep apnea in REM because if we were graphing muscle tone, so it's while we're awake, it's going to be high, and then
hmm,
as we transition to sleep, we enter, vast majority of us who aren't narcoleptics, which is a very rare condition, we enter sleep in non-REM, and there's gonna be a drop. But then you're chugging along, and then we typically have periods of REM about every 90 minutes, And
Yeah.
as the night goes on, those periods get more dense. So we have more rapid eye movements and more of typical REM physiology. But when you enter REM, your muscle tone goes off the cliff. You're basically paralyzed. And you could think of this as this is the way we were designed to prevent us from acting out dreams. That would be very bad, right? And in fact, some people have a disorder where they lose that normal paralysis that occurs during REM, and they're like fighting bears and stuff like that. And they can punch their bed partners or get really injured falling out of bed and stuff like that. Um, so in REM sleep, as the muscle tone goes very low, then that may predispose for people predisposed to it, your airway to become very collapsible and just boom, 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 starts closing up on you. And you have a lot of apneas or hypopneas. Apneas are full closures of the airway. Hypopneas are partial closures that cause your brain to wake up and oxygen drops. And they're both the same badness for you. So if you suppress REM, you may get some improvement in obstructive sleep apnea. So that is my take on why it's showing some promise there.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, well, it'll be exciting to hear what happens with that drug. I'm always curious. I just remembered vividly grade 12 camping. We had a story. It was there was copious amounts of alcohol consumed, but there were a couple people that decided, well, I'm not getting any REM sleep because I'm drinking all day, so I'm just going to stay up all night. Why bother? Or I'm going to wake up super early because I'm not going to get any REM sleep either way. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're just doubling down on the fact that you're not getting any sleep and no REM sleep. So I was interested in that because, for me, I'm cognizant now more than ever of making sure that my sleep is, cherished. And I honestly am put full emphasis on it. I make sure that an hour before bed, I have zero blue light. Got my blue light blocking glasses on. Everything else in the house is dark. I try and keep my room pitch black, cold. Are there any kind of other aspects that you suggest for people as a nighttime routine that they should implement?
Yeah, so you're hitting a lot of them. Sounds like really good about your sleep hygiene, as we call it. So ideally, you want your bedroom to be cave-like, like pitch black. Really, some athletes tend to be obsessive. So if you really want to go there, then unplugging or covering all the little lights from your electronics, your alarm clock and stuff like that. So it's none of that. Even the slightest bit of light can actually cause your brain to kind of be more prone to waking up during the night. You should have it cool. So the research suggests like quite cool, like maybe upper 60s, your bedroom temperature.
Okay.
Yeah. And then use blankets and whatnot to get you comfortable. Quiet. So this is increasingly problematic for most of humanity who's living in an urban environment now. So earplugs, I'm a big fan of white noise that sort of drowns out stuff. And then what are you going to do about your partner or other animals in bed with you? So a lot of my
variable factors.
Patients have like their dogs and cats in bed with them, and then their human bed partner snores or has restless legs or has a crazy different schedule. So I'm very very open about how I feel is. So if you look historically at humanity, it was only until very recently that people commonly shared beds with their mates. So it was like only until like, I don't know, 150 years ago, it would only be like the poorest of the poor who slept in the same bed with their spouse. So, okay, there's probably a reason for that, right? So most of the research, and I'm a fan of it, suggests that like at least sleeping in a different bed where the person's, their body movements aren't waking you up or they're getting up to the bathroom, but even in a different bedroom may help you get better quality sleep. As for pets, people have really strong feelings about this, and the science is unequivocally clear that they are not good for your sleep. Yet, subjectively, people will often report better sleep, even though we know, like if we were watching their brainwaves and stuff, that their sleep quality is worse. They'll tell you, oh, I sleep better with my pet. So that's like a psychological thing.
Yeah, they want a little snuggle buddy, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, those are some really important things. And like you mentioned, they're trying to avoid the blue light. So you're on it with the blue blockers. Now, computers and smartphones have different settings and apps to reduce that exposure, which would be good too. But really, still, to this day, the best thing you can do is have a very consistent wind down routine.
Yeah.
And the best thing you can do for your wind down routine, in my humble opinion, is reading an actual book. I would approve a Kindle or something like e-reader that has a grayscale that is not throwing out a lot of blue light. But what you want to do is read something that is not going to supercharge you like some sort of thriller and is not work related, because then that gets your subconscious mind working on that. So fiction or nonfiction, if you're a religious person, the Bible is perfect. It's going to make you very sleepy very quickly for most folks. And you want to do that consistently to wind down. But importantly, ideally you want to do that outside of your bed. Because it's still like Pavlov is very relevant for what we're doing. So Pavlov conditioning. So you want to really only associate the bed with sleep. And also we allow sex in your bed too, right?
Yeah,
right.
Too,
So
it was like
two things.
Nathan Jackson was like sleep and sex.
Yeah. So and this is more for people who have trouble sleeping, that we get, push them to do more of this stuff. But like the best sleep hygiene would be to do everything besides sleep and sex out of your bed. But also don't sleep anywhere else. Like don't sleep in your favorite chair or couch, because then your brain starts to get confused as to, this is better for me to sleep in, right? So that's an important thing. So that's what I would recommend is reading, and it should be in low light, basically as low light as you can tolerate and still see the page. And after about 20, 30 minutes of that, you should start to feel like you're ready to go to sleep and your body's ready to really ramp down.
Good to know. Yeah, I remember actually, Jordo, we went through this a year and a half ago now, or probably almost 2 years ago, I guess, when we originally started the podcast. We were working with Nathan Jackson. He was helping us with our fitness, nutrition, health. And one of the things Jordan was struggling with was his sleep. He was known for going to bed at 1, 2 a.m., sitting on his computer all night. So not to put him on blast, but that was one of the things, he had to adjust his schedule and make sure that he was, doing the necessary things to adjust his sleep hygiene to be prioritized and make it a priority.
How old is he? Or how old was he?
Jordo's 25, 26.
Okay. So, and you're about the same age, but so this is important to understand that there's a normal pattern with teenagers and people in their early 20s where your circadian rhythms tend to shift backwards. So there's a tendency to want to stay up late and sleep in late, which is often a tragedy with the way schools are set up, because you might have a 15-year-old kid whose body is telling him to stay up to 2 a.m. and wake up at 10. And then as school goes on, the grades get higher, we tend to bring kids in earlier and earlier. It's like totally contradictory. So a lot of sleep specialists have really been advocates for delaying start time, because actually we get better performance out of kids and better health outcomes too. So it's very common that people want to stay up late, and a lot of times I'll see teens or people in the early 20s and they're like, oh, what am I doing wrong? I just can't fall asleep till 2 and I'm doing good sleep hygiene. And it's like, well, this is ingrained in your body. It's just this kind of a cycle we go through, and it tends to go away as we get into our mid-20s, but some people it doesn't. But if you're fighting that, then melatonin is very good for that. So what you want to do typically, it's sort of paradoxical. you want to take a tiny dose of melatonin. Actually, so small you can't really get it commercially, which like half of a milligram. It's really hard to find. This has been found to be very effective. So, but what you want to do is take that about 5 hours before your desired bedtime. So, like if you've got to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to go to school or work, what have you, and you can't fall asleep typically till 1, well, let's work backwards. We want to get
7 to 9, right?
Yeah, 7 to 9. For that, if you're a teenager, really like 8 to 9. And if you're an elite athlete, really like 9. So that's another thing we haven't talked about, but just a little digression that I'll circle back. So there was a survey done, and it's a little bit outdated because it's been a while since I looked at it, but the average self-reported total amount of sleep that a lot of big name elite athletes get is just like clearly showing a trend that it's more than typical people need. So like Roger Federer, 11 to 12 hours a night. I'm looking at this right now. LeBron James, 12 hours a night. On and on. I mean, it's just real. It's a ton, with one really notable exception. It's so funny. Tiger Woods, 4 to 5 hours a night.
And now, so does he have that gene, the 1 or 2%
I think
population?
he's just a stress case and has a lot of psychological stuff going on, but it's fascinating because he's the guy that got into trouble with the Ambien, right? And driving away with the, he's probably has chronic insomnia, is taking Ambien, led to that whole, his first scandal. More recently, he had that really weird car accident and his career, who knows what's going to really happen, but that was weird too. And it makes me wonder, well, could a sleep disorder have been a part of that? I don't know. That's just conjecture. But anyways, getting back to the teenager person in your young 20s. So if they're only getting like 6 hours of sleep because they can't fall asleep at 1, you want to get, like, let's say at least want them to be asleep by 11 at night so they could get at least 8 hours if they have to wake up at 7. So you would take that little tiny bit of melatonin at about 6 to prep you, and that's really going to help you out. So that's an important thing for people in that age group who are struggling with that. It's called when it gets really pathological and it leads to getting fired from work or failing your classes. It's called delayed sleep, circadian rhythm sleep disorder, delayed sleep phase type, to be totally accurate about it. Most people just call it delayed sleep phase.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are running short on time, but I have 2 more questions. The first being sleepwalking. I've suffered from this. I shouldn't say suffered is the word, but I've experienced this before. Can you maybe touch on that? Because, one story that is vivid is me waking up, walking to the garbage can in our kitchen with my mom in the living room, and like me almost using it as a toilet, to be completely honest. And then the second being, we wrap up every episode asking what the biggest piece of advice would be for our guests to the next generation of athletes. So a twofold before we wrap up here for our last couple minutes.
Cool. So there are 2 types of sleepwalking: non-REM based and REM based. And the type that you described by the description, it sounds like the more common type, which is not a non-REM parasomnia. Parasomnia is a term that means a complex behavior that occurs during sleep. That the REM type is the type I was referring to, where people lose that muscle tone, safety valve there. That usually happens in the second half of the night when we have more REM, more and deeper REM sleep. But the type that I think you probably had is very common, and the description is usually like nonsensical, weird behaviors that the person seems sort of like a zombie. Whereas the REM type, people are usually like screaming and fighting or doing something active in a dream. And it's like the opposite type of behavior as with the more typical non-REM parasomnia. So this typically, it's very common. It tends to run in families, and it is the more common type is much more frequent in the first half of the night. It's basically like a stage, an N3 problem. So what's happening here is you're getting into N3 that's like I described the brainwaves, like you're really out of it, right? You're in like a zombie mode, but something causes your brain to partially wake up, and it sets off an episode where you're basically half awake and half asleep. And so people start acting out these basic drives. So you're in such a deep sleep that you're just functioning basically on brainstem. So the typical behaviors that occur are like very primitive behaviors: walking, eating,
Going to
uh,
the washroom.
like kind of grunting and stuff like that. It's not going to usually be like complex speech.
Right.
So why are some people predisposed to that? Well, there are genetic factors, but lifestyle factors too. So sleep deprivation or sleep disruption, and that can be due to simply not getting enough sleep. Because so a very common scenario I'd see people young, it tends to happen in younger folks because we have more N3 when we're young. Unfortunately, as we get older, that N3 just kind of goes away, that deep restorative sleep. And it's probably associated with why elderly people generally report such terrible sleep quality, and they're kind of like napping on and off during the day, but like at night, they're like not really getting great sleep. And so a lot of elderly people have zero N3. So you're going to have the most N3 in your like teen, early 20 years. And if you stay up all night for your exams, the next night you're going to have a rebound of the N3 sleep, and it might be unstable and more likely to fragment. And your brain could wake up, and then you could set off one of these episodes. Alcohol does this too. It also tends to cause your brain to partially wake up during you have more deep sleep, as we talked about, and then there's something about the alcohol that makes your brain more likely to wake up. Maybe it's because you're now having some sleep apnea or something like that, but then you can set that off. And proper managing of sleep hygiene, avoiding major sleep deprivation periods, and trying to avoid just massive alcohol binging can really usually make that go away for most folks.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Dr. Krainin, I could talk to you for hours.
Yeah. And so
we'll chat
to
again,
answer your other question is really get enough sleep. It sounds trite, but I think what we see here, a clear trend that elite athletes are really elite sleepers. And if you're really training hard, I would suggest you try to get at least 9 hours of sleep. I think that would be better for you. And if you need to get a nap to get there, then go for it. But I think you really need to, just like you're prioritizing your training, you need to prioritize your recovery as kind of the yin yang to your training. So, a lot of folks, so there's this overtraining syndrome where all of a sudden people like hit a wall and they're kind of going downhill with their training. They're not improving. And that is often because they're not getting enough sleep or just not getting enough good quality sleep. And then if you have one of these things that we've talked about during this conversation, like problem, snoring a lot, or you think you have restless legs, or you think you might have that circadian rhythm disorder, delayed sleep phase type, get in touch with the sleep specialist, and it could really help your performance out.
Awesome. And we'll include all of your links to your website and everything down below. Dr. Krainin, thank you again so much.
It's been a pleasure.
For educating the next generation of athletes. I think this is going to be an incredibly useful episode. I'm very grateful to have been able to chat with you for an hour. I look forward to keeping in touch. And
likewise,
this is the most important recovery tool that we have in our basket of goodies to use. Yeah. So hopefully athletes take your advice and use this effectively. Appreciate it again.
My pleasure.
Thank you, folks, for tuning into the 96th episode of the Athletes Podcast featuring Dr. Joseph Krainin. If you enjoyed the show, hit that like button, subscribe, share our content, do whatever you got to do. We really appreciate it. It means a lot to us. We are on the road to number 100. Jordan Maslin is our producer. He liked this one. Ian Singleton is our videographer. He dropped a comment on our Instagram. I'm David Stark, your host. Thank you, folks, for tuning in again. 96th episode of the Athletes Podcast. Bye.